Hello, I'm Ken Levy, and I'm the author of several books arguing that God exists. And I've compressed the argument in those books into three small bite-sized video lectures. So let's get started. The lectures are called Mind of God, Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. And today is Part 2. But in Part 1, the focus was defining just what it is we mean when we say God. And I came up with the following definition. Omnipotence and omniscience. Whatever else we mean by God, he must be all-powerful and all-knowing. Anything less could not be God. So given that definition, where do we look to find such a being? And to me, the answer is both simple and straightforward. The universe. The universe, and only the universe, is all-powerful over our lives. The laws of the universe, the basic fundamental laws of the universe, like gravity, relativity, quantum dynamics, thermodynamics, apply the same way everywhere. They work the same on Earth as in Pluto. They work the same in the Milky Way as in the Andromeda galaxy. The laws of the universe are all-embracing. They apply exactly the same way, no matter where they are. They are omnipotent. But it's one thing to point out that the universe is omnipotent, that being one of the fundamental definitions for God, but quite something else to show that the universe is omniscient, that the universe, in fact, thinks. And my focus in Part 2, in the current lecture, is to provide scientific evidence that that is the case. And this evidence is broken down into three parts. First, that the universe is a single body. Second, that it's intentional. And third, that it's conscious. So let's start with number one. When you look up at the night sky, what you see is a scattering of objects, a scattering of galaxies and stars, planets, all separated from each other by vast distances of blackness. And we call that blackness, empty space. But sometimes looks can be deceiving. And what science teaches us is that, in fact, empty space is not really empty. And if you look close enough, if you go down to the sub microscopic level, you look as close as you possibly can, what you actually see isn't emptiness. What you actually see is something that looks more like the picture here on the left. Scientists call it, quote, the atomic nature of space. And it's because at that level, space is made up of indivisible tiny little chunks of volume joined together to form a tissue that stretches from one end of the universe to the other. In fact, quote, everything is connected. So the universe is in fact a single body. And it's intentional. We live in what could be called a Goldilocks universe, where everything is just right. All of the elements and all of the forces that you see listed on this page had to be exactly fine-tuned in order to produce the universe that we live in. For example, let's look at the strong force. If the strong force were ever so slightly weaker by, let's say, 0.2%, then the nucleus of atoms would fly apart. Or the electron mass. If the mass of the electron were ever so slightly heavier, let's say by 0.5%, then electrons would go crashing into the nucleus and atoms could not exist. And the same thing is true for all of the other elements and forces on this page. If they were slightly stronger, slightly weaker, slightly heavier, slightly lighter, life could not exist. Planets would fly out of their orbit. Suns would fly apart, and the universe, as we know it, would dissolve. So our universe is exceedingly, exceedingly fine-tuned. Could this have happened by accident? Scientists say no. Stephen Hawking, for example, say, were it not for a series of startling coincidences, life could not have come into being. And Lee Smolin says that it simply could not have happened by accident. In fact, the chances for our universe coming about exactly the way it did are 1 in 10 to the 220th power. 10 to the 1 to 220th power is an astronomical figure. It is so astronomical that Smolin basically is saying it's impossible. Our universe could not possibly have popped into being one day so finely calibrated that it produced life. It had to have come about on purpose. It had to have come about by intent. Finally, the universe is conscious. And evidence for this comes from P.W. Atkins, a professor of chemistry at Oxford University. Atkins states flat out, space itself is self-conscious. Space-time is self-aware. Now, why does he say this? Why is he so confident? This is why. Our universe is 3D. It consists of 3 dimensions of space. And the effect of that is to produce a hall of mirrors. For example, if our universe were 1D, then it would be nothing but a straight line with no width. Such a universe could not be conscious. If it were 2D, it would be flat like a piece of paper. Such a universe could not be conscious. But being 3D, our universe is more like a cube, where every surface in the universe reflects everything else. and every surface can reflect back on itself. Specifically, there's us, there's you and me. We aren't like separate from the universe itself. We're part of it. We're a piece of it. And for sure, you and I are conscious beings. So the universe is conscious in part because we are. But we are conscious because it is. After all, we are embedded in that hall of mirrors. Our ability to reflect comes from the reflective nature of the universe as a whole. So that concludes the scientific evidence for universal omniscience, the scientific evidence that the universe thinks. The science shows that the universe is a single body, not a disparate collection of separate bodies, that the universe came about on purpose, by intent, and finally, that the universe has a built-in capability for conscious thought. And that's the end of part 2. You have now seen an overview of the scientific evidence for the mind of God in the universe. But sometimes science isn't quite enough. Science gives us facts and figures, but sometimes we need to see things for ourselves. Seeing, after all, is believing. And so in part 3, I go beyond the science and talk about personal experience, evidence for the mind of God that comes from everyday experience that you and I have all the time. In the meantime, I'm Ken Levy. You can find out more about me at kenlevy.weebly.com. Thank you.